bless you for all of you celebrating AA anniversaries. Thank you for sharing them with us. Once again, proof that AA works. All right, as I understand it, we are on page 178. 178 on the very last paragraph where it says my wife. So, Dr. Bob, in the paragraph before this, where we ended up last week, described his initial contact with the Oxford movement. So I want to talk because there's a lot of new people present at this meeting who do not know what the Oxford movement was. The Oxford movement was a first century Christian movement that gained a lot of popularity during the Great Depression. To try to make this really simple, it was non-denominational, and they believed that it was through the practice of spiritual principles in our lives that society could solve the problems. Now, this was during the Depression, so you had tons of people out of work, people going hungry. There was a lot of anguish in the country at that time. And so this Oxford movement came along, and it was very, very simple. They believed that the principles that were practiced in the first century, the first 100 years AD, was really the best time in humanity, as there were people who during that particular time had been around the master when he was alive, and his word still hung in the air. There was a real focus on living spiritually. So that's what the Oxford movement was. That's what they believed. So this Oxford movement gains a lot of traction, and it comes to Akron, Ohio fairly early. One of the Firestone sons, and a lot of you are familiar with Firestone tires, one of them had a bad drinking problem. And he got connected with these Oxford group people, and it seemed to be of some help. So the Firestones, being very wealthy and influential, invited some Oxford group people to come introduce themselves to the community, and that's how the Oxford movement came to Akron. So Dr. Bob, in his description in the prior paragraph, talks about his initial meeting with these people, and he talked about his attraction to them. They seemed happy, they seemed well adjusted. They gave him a lot of suggestions of things to read. He talked to them at great length. He knew that the answer that they had or what they were about was spiritual in nature. So if you look at the last two lines of the paragraph before where we are now, it said, I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight every night nevertheless. So what was Dr. Bob doing? He was acquiring a lot of knowledge and intellect. And it is easy to come in here because I can only speak from my own experience. I came from a belief that knowledge is king. I came from a family where education was emphasized. And so I was always, and I did well in school. So I became convinced of the importance of intellect and knowing about stuff, which is way different than actually doing things, right? So I know that for a lot of us who come here and we get introduced to the literature, and we get introduced to book studies and workshops and 12-step weekends. All these things are fantastic. They're fabulous. But I have to remember that the purpose of these things is not to give me knowledge or intellect, because knowledge and intellect won't fix this. They are to give me directions that I apply in my daily life. Knowledge without application is fantasy. It is fantasy. And I said it last week. I've known a lot of people who were much more proficient with this book than I am, or a lot of people that I've known, and they died drinking and using. At some point, this has to move from my head to my feet. Now, it is important, and this is the reason we do these workshops like this and the 12-step weekend. It is important to know what to do. You can't do better till you know better, right? So it's important that we know what to do. But that has to translate from your head to your feet, or else you will be like Dr. Bob, who read and studied. And if you go to Dr. Bob's house in Akron, you will see his collection of Oxford Group reading materials. There's enough stuff to read to keep you reading for the rest of your life. But he got drunk every night. He continued to get drunk every night. So we're going to see what happens. Now, I want you to remember, because I mentioned this last week, the last 6 months of Dr. Bob's 2.5 years, Bill Wilson gets introduced to the Oxford movement in New York at Calvary Church. So Bill is in the Oxford movement as well. Both of them are. Right? And that's going to play a huge role in what's about to happen and why we are here tonight. Because had this not happened, we would not be here. When we start the book over, there'd be a lot more discussion about this Oxford. I don't want to go too far, but it is important tonight that our new friends understand who these people were and what their role was in helping us get this thing off the ground, okay? So, and we're going to talk more about that in the next couple of paragraphs. So let's go to the last paragraph on page 178. My wife became deeply interested, and we're talking about in what this Oxford movement was doing. And it was her interest that sustained mine. Then he says, though I at no time sensed that it might be an answer to my liquor problem. So here's Dr. Bob, and he's getting this Oxford group information about spiritual principles, okay? He's getting the information about spiritual principles. What is it that he really doesn't understand? He doesn't understand alcoholism, does he? Nor does he understand how these principles applied would treat his alcoholism. All he's doing is getting some information about this solution. Reminds me a great deal of Dr. Silkworth, who knew about the problem but didn't know about the answer. Reminds me of Ebby. Ebby learned what the answer was, but like Dr. Bob, had no understanding of alcoholism. Who was the first person who had all the pieces of the pie? Bill Wilson. He got the disease concept of alcoholism from Dr. Silkworth, and he got the spiritual answer through Ebby, who had gotten it from the Oxford group people. This is vitally important to what we do today. And I'm going to tie that up a little bit more in a few minutes. Let's continue. Ta-da. Ta-da. How my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years I'll never know, but she did. If she had not, I know I would have been dead a long time ago. Back on page 82, in the middle paragraph, the last two lines, it says, passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. So let me ask you a question tonight as you listen to me. Who kept the light on for you? You know, we go through life talking about, I ain't hurting nobody, I ain't this, I ain't that. Who kept the light on for you? Who could, even though they may have been sicker than you, who kept the light on for you till you got here? Who said a prayer for you? Who saw to it that you had something to eat when you didn't have no way to get nothing? Who kept the light on? In my own particular case, my parents, my grandparents, my grandmother and them, I had aunts and uncles. A lot of folk helped me. And you know, I made them people my enemies. Them was the people I pointed at and said, they don't understand me, blah, 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 blah. They won't do this for me. They won't do that for me. Boy, I tell you, truth is a powerful thing. Because I can look back on my life in truth today and understand what really happened. Not the lies I continually told myself. I said to one of my sponsees today that this book is a book of truth and lies. That's what this book is. This book talks about the illusion, the delusion, the dishonesty, not only with ourselves, but with the people around us. Whole life a lie. And the book, what does it say? Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. The book is a book of truth and lies. And what it does is it unmasks the lies, gets us to look at them through our own experience, and then shares with us the truth and gives us the power of example of people who have recovered through truth. How long am I going to go through life lying to myself? It is the root of unbelief. It is the root of fear. When the book says God is or God isn't, God is everything or he is nothing, what is it asking you? What do you believe? Do you believe the truth or do you believe the lie? Because if I believe the lie, that means I got to manage my own life. Let's take a look at Kid's track record running his own life. Is everybody following me? Am I making sense? It's about truth and lie. That's what this is about. The principle, the first step is honesty. That's a very convenient thing because without that, the next 11 won't work. Okay? Let's get back to the text. For some reason, we alcoholics seem to have the gift of picking out the world's finest women. Why they should be subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them, I cannot explain. About this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon, saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. Now, this is where Bill's story meets the doctor's nightmare, right? Because what has Bill Wilson been doing in Akron? What was he doing the very day before?
Looking for drugs to help.
Pacing the lobby of the Mayflower. I want you to stop for a minute and I want you to think about this. You got this drunken doctor who's going to Oxford group meetings. About 2 weeks before this takes place, Dr. Bob does something that he could not believe that he did. He goes to an Oxford group meeting and he stands up and he says to the group, I am a secret drinker. And no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I don't want to, I get drunk every day, and that includes coming in here and sitting with you people. And he sat down. Now, a lot of people in that room knew that he had a drinking problem, because we always the last ones to know, right? We think nobody knows, right? Yeah. But Henrietta Seiberling of the Seiberling family, and many of you have been to the Stan Hewitt Hall in the state in Akron, where that's where Henrietta lived, in the gatehouse out there by the road. Many of you have been in that gatehouse. Yep. Henrietta holds a special prayer meeting for Dr. Bob. They got together, and none of them knew what to do for him. They didn't have an answer to that. So they prayed, and Henrietta said, we asked God to send somebody that Dr. Bob could hear. I want you to stay with me. Send somebody Dr. Bob could hear. This is a couple of weeks before this. So we flash forward, Bill Wilson in town. They're trying to take over this company with the proxy fight. We all know the story. Bill and his crew lose the proxy fight. Everybody else goes back to New York. Bill stays behind to see if anything illegal was done, because he had nothing to go back to in New York. He had no job. All these other people had jobs and money that was involved in this. Bill had nothing. So he stays inactive. And of course, full of resentment, full of fear, he is tempted to drink. And he's walking the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel. As he put it, I had $10. I could go into the bar in the Mayflower and be king for a day, as he put it, and maybe make a friend. Then he said to himself, maybe I'll just go in there and have some ginger ale. And then he knew. He knew then, it's back on me. And he did something that the book tells us to do. And I want to share this tonight. For those of you who struggle, for those of you who are having problems with this, for those of you who are in a difficult place right now, he thought to himself, what about those people, those other alcoholics who need what I have? He turned his thoughts to what? Helping someone else. The story said his sanity returned, and sanity is what? Truth, right? We just got done talking about truth. It said his sanity returned, and he thanked God. His sanity returned, and he thanked God. He turned his thought. Anybody in here listening to me right now that's going through it, anybody that's in the valley right now, sitting around thinking about me ain't gonna get me out of it. When I would call my first sponsor and give him my list of grievances for the day, I spent a lot of time in the valley when I first got here. He would say to me, who you helping? I would say to him, I need help. You're not listening to me. Let me tell you again the sad story of this day. And I'd run through it again. And Bill would say to me, who are you helping? Click. And he would hang up.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
He was trying to teach me to live in the answer and not the problem. That is a choice. And everybody within the sound of my voice tonight who's in the valley has that choice. I know we want somebody to wave a magic wand and make it all better right now. But if you'll do that, it'll get better right now, because right now is all you got. So in effect, that is the magic wand. Because all you got is right now, what you got you in the valley, what you worried about ain't even happened yet, and more than likely isn't gone. Right now. So Bill Wilson, who's been going to the Oxford movement in New York for the last 6 months, right? Remember, there ain't no AA, ain't nothing like that, right? Nobody in New York got sober with the message he was carrying. But he came to Akron armed with some new tools that he had not yet used in New York when he was unsuccessful. Remember when he told Lois, I'm going to go back to Wall Street, none of these people are getting sober, and Lois said, but you stayed sober doing it. That's number one, right? So Bill in the Mayflower, he tempted to drink, Lois, but you stayed sober doing it. His sanity returned, he thanked God. What about these people who need help? Second thing, the conversation with Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silkworth said, stop preaching to people. Talk drunk to a drunk. Establish identification with your story. What today we call a drunk-a-law. Once you do that, and you sink that hook, I like calling it, then you can share the solution. So Bill is armed with a new way of presenting this, different than what he'd been doing in New York. Okay? So now that his sanity has returned, he needs to find help. Somebody to help, somebody to work with, right? In order to get help for himself. So he goes to a church directory and he sees the name Walter Tunks. Walter Tunks was an Episcopal minister in Akron. And the only reason Bill chose his name was that in Vermont, where Bill and Dr. Bob were from, when you took a walk in the woods, it was called a tunk. That's a Vermont word, a tunk. Let's take a tunk. That means let's go take a hike. So he sees the name Tunks, so he calls that number. That's the reason he did it.
Wow.
Tunks answers. He says, do you know any Oxford group people? Tunks says, I'm not one, but let me give you some names of some people who've gotten involved in that. Okay. So, make a long story short, he ends up with Henrietta Seiberling being the last name. Everybody else was too busy for him. Henrietta Seiberling. Now, Bill Wilson was a very successful man at one time on Wall Street, and he belonged to a lot of clubs in New York, men's clubs. Some of you have heard of the New York Athletic Club. They give out something called the Heisman Trophy in college football. Those are the kind of clubs that they had in New York, and Bill was a member of many of those clubs. And he knew F.A. Seiberling. F.A. Seiberling, the tire king from Akron, was a member of some of those same clubs. Bill was like, I can't call over there and let them people know what I am now, that I'm a drunk. And then he said to himself, something said, you better put that nickel in there, you better call that number. And he called and he gets Henrietta. Now remember, 2 weeks before, at the prayer meeting for Dr. Bob, they asked God to send somebody that Dr. Bob could hear. Phone rings, a man says, I am a rum hound from New York, and I need to talk to another drunk to stay sober myself. What do you think Henrietta was thinking? She said, manna from heaven. Manna from heaven, oh, I got a guy for you. I got a guy for you. So that, all of that brings us up to this moment. So let's see what happens after this phone call. It was the day before Mother's Day, Saturday, and I had come home plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I sat down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. So our boy is not in too good a shape today to be 12-stepped, if you will. The next day she called again, wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly. I said, let's make the call, and extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes. And Dr. Bob's wife was very persuasive. Now, he don't put that in there. But Ann pretty much told him, oh, you go. You go, whether you want to go or not. That's when Dr. Bob said, I will give this bum 15 minutes. And Dr. Bob said, you know, as we drove over there, and some of you have experienced those day after, right? Sick, jittery, head pounding, right? He was like, 15 minutes of this will be all I can stand. All that I can stand. Right?
You go.
Let's continue.
We going.
We entered her house at exactly 5 o'clock, and it was 11:15 when we left. So it was a little longer than 15 minutes. It was 6 hours longer than 15 minutes. When they got there, they were going to sit down to eat. And Dr. Bob's daughter, Sue, was there. And Sue was my friend. And she told me that her father was shaken so bad because he had not been able to drink that day, obviously. Ann was all over him. He was shaken so bad he could not keep the food on his fork. And he was humiliated. And Bill Wilson sees this because Bill Wilson has lived that. And he knows what it feels like. And he says to Dr. Bob, look, man, you came over here so we could talk. Why don't we go talk? We could eat later. And Dr. Bob said, I liked him immediately. I liked him immediately because he could see how uncomfortable and how embarrassed I was. And he took me off the hook. So they go into the library in that little gatehouse. A lot of y'all been in that library. And the door closes. It's 5 o'clock. It's 11:15 when they come out. Let's see what Doc has to say. I had a couple of shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly. Okay, so we already know, and for those of you who are working with new people, please take heed of this. Pay attention to this. Because this is the formula for approaching somebody who needs help. Bill did exactly what Dr. Silkworth told him to do. He talked to Dr. Bob about his drinking. Not Dr. Bob's drinking. He didn't know Dr. Bob. He talked to Dr. Bob about his own drinking. Read Bill's story. All the things that alcohol cost him. All the things it took from him. All the different ways he tried to stop unsuccessfully. all the pain, the heartache, the family troubles, the wasted opportunities, the hospitals, the sanitariums. How many sanitariums had Dr. Bob been in? We've been in this story for about 3 weeks, right? He said at one point it was too numerous to count. Do you understand the power of your story? Do you understand the power of your story? That you will be able to reach someone who is unreachable by people unlike us.
Yeah.
There is power in your story. You know, when we share, we all love to talk about the solution, don't we? But without establishing identification, you share a solution with me, I'm not listening to you because I compare, you talking, I don't even know if you like, who are you? What you gonna tell me about being out there? No, a lot of times, and it's well, I get it, it's well-intentioned. Well, we just gonna talk about the solution. We just gonna talk about the step. You just lost the new people.
Amen.
They don't know nothing about that. Let me know you've been where I've been. Because what comes from the heart will reach the heart. Once you do that, when I first came here, and I didn't have a sponsor, and I didn't work the steps, and I didn't do what I was supposed to do, you know why I came here? Because I knew I belonged here. That's why I came here. Because y'all had what I had. As much as the people in my life loved me, as much as my friends loved me, as much as my parents and my family loved me, they didn't have what I had. I came here and I listened to speakers for months. And it settled me here. It settled me here. It wasn't enough to keep me here. Eventually, by the end of the 3rd month, I had to get some help or I was going to drink. But it settled me here long enough to fully concede to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic. To fully concede to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic. I do not recommend that you have to do what I did for 3 months. You can get a sponsor today. You do not have to suffer like that. But it settled me enough that I conceded that I got what you got. You called yourself alcoholic and you described my life. You called yourself alcoholic and you described my life. You described things in me that I'd never tell anybody. And you said it out loud. You talked about how dishonest you were. You talked about how frightened you were. You talked about how frustrated you were. You talked about trying to stop something you couldn't stop. And people who ain't got it don't get it.
Yeah.
There is power in your story. Tell your story. Tell your story. Yeah, plenty of time to get into the solution. But until I establish identification, it ain't nothing but information. That's all it is, just information. And I don't identify with it at a personal level. I do not. Not until you sink that hook. So Bill sinks the hook, then talks to Doc about what he's doing to stay sober. Now you got to remember, the steps do not exist. AA does not exist. The big book does not exist. These guys are going to Oxford group meetings. None of this stuff exists. But he gave him the course of action that he'd gotten from Ebby. We saw that in Bill's story. We will see that in Bill's story again in a couple of months when we get back into it. We saw what Ebby gave Bill. And in Bill's story, you see all 12 steps. Bill's story was written long before How It Works. They had the steps. They just didn't have them in terse and tangible form like you have them today. They had them. Dr. Bob said, we figured out, we knew we had them because we know now that without them, you cannot stay sober. So he said, we knew we had them. We just didn't have them laid out and numbered like you have them now. Okay? So he laid that out for Doc. Let's see what happened to Doc. So I had a couple of shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly based on this information that he had received. This dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. So what happened? After they come out of this 6 hour and 15-minute meeting, Dr. Bob says to his wife, Ann, can he come stay with us? He understands. Dr. Bob didn't want to let Bill go. He understands. Bill run out of money. Henrietta and him had put him up the country club. If you go down Fortis Path going toward the gatehouse, you'll see that country club on the left before you get down to Stan Hewitt. That's where Bill Wilson was staying. That's where they put him up for a minute. Some Oxford group people put him down there. Then he left there and he went up to 855 Ardmore. And he stayed with Dr. Bob and Ann and the kids for 3 months. So after 3 weeks, let's take a look at what happens. This dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend several days meeting of a national society of which I was a member, and that was the American Medical Association, and it was their annual convention. Now, Dr. Bob is sober 3 weeks. Nobody thinks this is a good idea except Dr. Bob. He's the only one that thinks this is a Bill is not too hot for it. Ann is definitely not hot for it. She said, you're too weak. It's too soon. You got to get us some time. Dr. Bob said, no, I got to get on with life. I got to get on with life. Okay? Now, when Bill laid out the answer for Dr. Bob, it was what he had gotten from Ebby, okay? And it was the steps, even though the steps didn't exist in the form we have them now. And one of those steps is the 9th step. May direct and mend such people wherever possible, except when they do so would injure them or others. Dr. Bob said, I don't think so.
I'm others.
Dr. Bob said, look, buddy, I ain't got much of a practice left. And if I go out here and start telling people, making amends and telling people what my problem has been, I'm going to lose the rest of the practice that I have. So I will do anything you say but that. So Dr. Bob was living in what? Starts with an F.
Fear.
Fear. Right? Dr. Bob was living in fear. Okay? So Bill couldn't make him go make his amends. Right? Dr. Bob's living in fear. So let's see what happens. He leaves 3 weeks, ain't made no amends, so he has not done what Bill's asked him to do. Let's see what happens to him. I drank all the scotch they had on the train. That's what happened to me. and bought several quarts on my way to the hotel. Doc is sprung. He done got sprung. Y'all know what it's like when you get sprung. No, I ain't doing nothing. I'm cool. Boom, hit that first one. I'm sprung. Right, now it's on. Sky's the limit. This was on Sunday night. I got tight that night. Stayed sober till Monday after the dinner. I love the way Dr. Bob writes. Dr. Bob said, I got tight. See, Dr. Bob was cool. See, a lot of y'all don't know, Dr. Bob was cool. And you know Dr. Bob was cool because, you know, he's just not getting sober. One of the earmarks of the alcoholic is like, we're really immature. We never grow up, right? We've seen the immaturity of Dr. Bob. We've seen his father have to come all the way across the country and get his grown butt, put him in the hospital, bring him all the way home, school fees, right? Dr. Bob is very immature. So Dr. Bob gets sober. Dr. Bob was cool. Dr. Bob was known for his wild neckties. He used to have these wild colored painted neckties, and that was kind of his trademark, right? Dr. Bob was laid back, and he was cool. Dr. Bob said, I got tight. My sponsor lived with Dr. Bob and Ann for about a year and a half in the mid-1940s. And when I asked him about Doc, this is what he told me. He said, Doc was the most laid-back guy you ever met. He said, if you walked in the front door and he was sitting on the couch in the living room reading the paper, and you said, Doc, the house is on fire. He said, Doc would look up over top of the newspaper and go, which end? Dr. Bob was cool. He was a cool guy. Let's continue.
I love it.
I got tight that night, stayed sober Monday till after the dinner, and then proceeded to get tight again. I drank all I dared in the bar and then went to my room to finish the job. Tuesday, I started in the morning. I like how he say this, getting well organized by noon. How many of y'all I got well organized, right? I got well organized this morning, right? Yep, you can see, right?
Another lie.
I did not want to disgrace myself, so I then checked out. I bought some more liquor on the way to the depot. I had to wait some time for the train. Now we come to something that we all familiar with, the blackout. I remember nothing from then on until I woke up at a friend's house in a town near home. What happened? Dr. Bob, in a blackout, gets on the train, fall out. When the train got to Akron, they carried him off, took his ID, had his medical office number on there, called his nurse, the nurse that worked with him in his office, said, we got him down here, he's well organized. Tight as a drum. Somebody need to come get him. So her and her husband go get Doc, and they take him to their home in Cuyahoga Falls. Some of y'all know where Cuyahoga Falls is. So they took Doc over to Cuyahoga Falls. So they built the house, call Ann, and tell her, we got Doc over here, he tore up. So she sends Bill to get him. And, Doc had a surgery to do, or else he was going to lose his place in City Hospital. And that was the last hospital in Akron. So Ann said to Bill Wilson, would you please? Bill was ready to go back to New York. Bill said, he said, honestly, I was sick of him. He said, I really was. He said, I was sick and tired of him. And he wanted to go back to New York, and Ann said, please stay, help me get him sober so we can do this surgery, because if he doesn't do it, we're going to lose everything. So Bill is walking Dr. Bob up and down Ardmore Avenue. They pouring coffee in him, right? They trying to get him together. The next morning, gets him a bottle of beer on the way to the hospital to calm his nerves so he stops shaking, right? And Doc goes in and does the surgery. Let's continue here. These good people notified my wife, who sent my newly made friend over to get me. He came and got me home and to bed, gave me a few drinks that night, and one bottle of beer the next morning. That was June 10th, 1935. And that was my last drink. As I write, nearly 4 years have passed. Nearly 4 years have passed.
And that's
Now,
June 10th.
if you remember in a vision for you, we saw what happened to Doc. Remember when it said he took the bull by the horns and he went and he made his amends after he did that surgery. So he did the surgery, then he went around town and he started to make his amends. That's the one thing that he would not do prior. He was convinced. Sometimes we learn through trial and error, don't we? Okay? And he learned that if you want to stay sober, right? If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, if you knew what you're listening to me right now, are you willing to go to any length? Or are you looking at them steps like I did and marking some of them off because I ain't doing them, right? Of course, my statement to you would be, take a look at Doc. Take a look at what happened to Doc. You know what it is? I'm either in or I'm out. It's a 12-step program, not 11, not 3, not 5. Am I in or am I out? The question which might naturally come into your mind would be, what did the man do or say that was different from what others had done or said? So every time this book asks a question, it will immediately answer in the next sentence or paragraph. So let's see what Bill did that was different. And for those of you who are working with others, who are approaching new people, take a very close look at this. It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. Academics, non-alcoholics, trying to get some understanding of what was wrong with him. That's all he had done, okay? But follow this. But this was a man who had experienced, would you underline, highlight, put a star by, circle the word experience. This was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had had most all the drunkards' experiences known to man. There's power in your story. There's power. How did he reach Doc? His experience. There's power in your story. Let's continue. but who had been cured, and that's what they called recovered back then, was cured, by the very means I had been trying to employ, that is to say, the spiritual approach. So Bill had been going to Alpha Group for 6 months, Doc 2.5 years. The difference between the two is Bill knew what the problem was, and Bill knew how to apply what they were learning at the Oxford Group from his head to his feet in his life to treat his alcoholism. Doc is just walking around with a bunch of information about how to stay sober. I can walk around here spouting platitudes about the 12 steps all I want to. But is that going to reach a new man? Some new guy sitting in a meeting? Hey man, let me tell you about these 12 golden steps. Hey man, let me tell you, you need to take 12 gold steps away from me. That would be my response. I don't know you. You ain't, and I come in here like everybody else, terminally unique. Ain't nobody got the problems I got. Ain't nobody suffered like I have. You haven't been treated like our Lord, it's terrible. What a story, right?
Woe is me.
There's power in your story. Use your story. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. I got a number one by that. First thing, doctor's opinion, right? So Bill, remember when I said Bill Wilson, the first person to have all the pieces of pie. Bill Wilson has the disease concept of alcoholism, Dr. Silkworth. No one else had had that. Obsession of the mind, allergy of the body, failure of the human will, restless, irritable, discontented. So he had all that to share through his own experience with Doc. Doc had never heard this information before. Dr. Bob said everybody he had talked to about alcoholism said, give him some bromides and a good lecture. That's it. That was the medical approach to alcoholism in 1935. But he gets with Bill, who shares with him the doctor's opinion. Bill Wilson got all the pieces of the pie, right? So he sinks the hook, talks about how that played out in his life, his story, got him, right? Let's continue. Of far more importance, and this is italicized, so it means it's vital, was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked who knew what he was talking about in regard to alcoholism. And here's the big one, from actual experience. He was able to make it come alive in his own story. He could describe, like in the chapter, more about alcoholism, the obsession of the mind, the allergy of the body, the failure of the human will, the promises over and over and over, the swearing and meaning that I ain't doing this no more, and doing it the same day. You can't do that unless you have lived it. I guess y'all can get tired of hearing me say it, but I'm going to say it one more time. There's power in your story. There's power in your story. But I got to know how to present it, don't I? I got to know how to present it. Talk drunk to a drunk, sink the hook, share the solution.
Amen.
In other words, he talked my language. You know what? I love that. That's why I kept coming to meetings. Because y'all talk my language. And it is a language that is not spoken anywhere that I've ever been outside of here. No. Unless I run into one of y'all on the street. And sometimes we see each other on the street, we don't even speak the language. We just look at each other and grin. Because we know, don't we? Because we know. He talked my language. And that language I've never heard it anywhere but here. Bill used to call it the language of the heart. The language of the heart. And what comes from the heart reaches the heart. He knew all the answers, And certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading. The power of example. Would you write that in your book, please? He can talk to me about a solution because I know that I got the same problem as him and it's working in his life. He is an example. The power of his example that he has something that works. And that is priceless. It is invaluable. And I don't know anywhere else that I've experienced it. Because I got the answer sitting in front of me. It's not somebody I'm hearing about. It ain't somebody I'm reading about. I got the answer sitting in front of me in flesh and bone and blood. Who talk my language, who can describe things inside of me that I ain't even got words for. That's why you see new people in meetings going like this. Because they ain't got them words. But when they hear them, they know exactly what it is. Bam, get you right here. Get you right here. This is the first real successful 12-step call. Eh? 6 months, Bill had been on successful. This is the first. I believe that we learn from our history. So those of you who are working with and approaching new people, here you go right here. Here you go right here. This is how it's done. All right? Okay, we're going to stop right there.